Here, I'll take it.
We don't have much time, so I'll just dive right in. We're gathered today seeing a current rise in anti-Semitism, and it's really one that began several years ago. It's become more violent and more open, and there are several reasons for the current rise. But one reason is that anti-Semitism in America today comes from many different sources. And it's really this complexity coming from so many different sides that creates the biggest challenge to combating it. You are all here today because you have very different experiences with anti-Semitism. And I want to begin by really unpacking what you're seeing. Andrew, I'd like to start with you. Today you are the head of the largest religiously liberal Jewish seminary in the nation, and the first non-rabbi to head this prestigious institution, and you're here in New York. But I want to tap into what you saw before you came to Hebrew Union College. You spent 27 years in the Midwest. What was your experience like with anti-Semitism there in Middle America? And what is changing?
Holly, thank you so much, and congratulations to David Harris and the AJC for holding this important event. I think that there are differences in anti-Semitism in the way that hate is expressed, depending in large part by the degree to which haters anonymize or feel connected to the people that they're hating. In the Midwest, more often than not, haters, whether white supremacists or others, don't have personal relationships with Jews. And so you see the targets of their attack much more systematically being institutions that happen to be places where Jews are located, rather than specifics. Think about the names of the cities that track a map of the most horrific anti-Semitic incidents in recent history, whether Collegeville, Texas, whether Pittsburgh, or Overland Park, Kansas. In each of those cases, it was an institution that was targeted for destruction, for the people to be destroyed, not based on how people looked, but based on the institutions that they could define. And so I think that what we're seeing is the need to create those personal relationships, which I know we'll talk about a little later. But I think that the key here is that the anonymity of the victim is critical, and it allows the kind of hate tropes and the tropes of anti-Semitism to percolate and to continue to spread, because you keep this distance between the perpetrator and the victim so far and so distant.
Did you encounter, I'll just stick with you, Andrew, in the Midwest, where would you say the main sources are of anti-Semitism? Is it, the far right, people not know Jews? What was your experience?
I think generally, if you look at the data, it is coming from the far right in the Midwest, in the middle of the country. And again, this is because that is tending to be where Jews live. They tend to live in communities that are more politically liberal, and so people can develop relationships with people that are not as alienated or as isolated on the right for that reason.
And in St. Louis, did you meet people that didn't know Jews at all?
It was ironic. I was the CEO of the Jewish Federation for 7 years. One of your national governors, Bob Newmark, I just want to shout out, is now the chairman of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis. But we were there when the first Jewish governor was elected. So there's this irony that the state could elect someone who is Jewish, but nevertheless people didn't know Jews. They didn't know individuals. So I would have the kind of anti-Semitism that I would call casual anti-Semitism at the personal level. People just didn't know, oh, you're Jewish, how interesting. Well, what's that about? They just don't know. So there's a gap, a significant gap of knowledge.
Thank you, Andrew. April, I'm going to turn to you now. You actively work in progressive spaces, and I think the anti-Semitism that Andrew has experienced, whether it be from the far right, ignorance, maybe some elements of Christian anti-Judaism, that's not at all what you have experienced with your work. And if you could speak to us, what happened to you last June and July following the Hamas-triggered conflict with Israel in May? What happened, and where do you see anti-Semitism in progressive spaces?
Thank you, Holly, and thank you to everyone here at the AJC for all the work that you do. It is so important for the world, really. And I say that as a chief equity and inclusion officer and somebody who works in this space for large companies. I was the head of equity and inclusion globally for a large nonprofit. And when we posted a statement against anti-Asian hate, I didn't have to go to the board. When I wanted to post a statement against anti-Semitism, I had to go to the board, and one of the board members said, oh, but we have to mention Israel. I said, no, we do not. Jew hate predates Israel. So if it's a problem, I will post. I will make all the statements, and I can walk away if there's a problem, which ended up happening. But when I made the statement, which did not mention Israel, someone attacked the statement in a monomaniacal tirade, starting with, yes, yay for making a statement against white supremacists and Christians. And I said, hate is not just from white supremacists and Christians. And then she said, well, where's the statement for Palestinians and Muslims? And I said, when we see a surge, we'll post something. And that was it. And so she started talking about slaughtering children on a children's book website. So I deleted her. It kept going. I blocked her. I deleted Jews who said similar things. And then I was called a white supremacist Talmudic Jew, see you next Tuesday, expletive, and was told, not by that person, but by somebody else, and the death threats came, the FBI got involved. She posted hashtag Free Palestine, and then it was on, right? Everybody came for me. We need a bat signal, so somebody needs to invent that one. And so for me, I was told, because she went through all my social media posts and found me speaking to an Israeli group saying I was pro-Israel and that I loved India as well, coincidentally, and that I should not be doing the work that I do. And it struck me. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't be here, right? I gained 20 pounds. I checked out. I stopped doing the work that I do. And then I'm back. I'm back because we have to, yeah. I still have 15 to go, but I have clothes to fit into, guys. So it's important for you to know that in progressive spaces, we're being asked to leave, and we are leaving in record numbers because, and we'll talk about that later, but we can't leave. We cannot.
Yeah.
So,
April, if you don't mind, if you just spend 30 more seconds, can you just tell us a little bit about your own identity, your own background, and what that means for this space?
Being called a white supremacist Jew, a Talmudic Jew, as a black Jew who speaks fluent Spanish, who's lived in South America and Israel. Most of my family is, either Latinx. My grandparents don't have a single white great-grandchild. And we have LGBTQ+, disabled, neuroatypicality in my family, which is why I do the work that I do. I am 100% black, I'm 100% Jewish, and my mom is in the audience, 5th row center. And so I made Newsweek 3 times. I was asked to be on The View. This was a big news cycle. It made it international news, and I did receive a lot of wonderful support from my Jewish community, so I want to thank you for that. But yeah, being called a white supremacist for that reason was surprising. Sorry.
Thank you, April. Jacob, you're a reporter. You actively cover issues of anti-Semitism. You're also visibly Jewish, and we know there's a huge uptick right now of anti-Semitic attacks against visible Jews, against the Haredi community in New York. I want to ask you, what are you seeing? What is the source or the sources of anti-Semitism here in New York City? It's not as simple as calling it far right or far left. That's my first question. And my second question is, how is the Haredi community feeling? How is this impacting this community, these attacks?
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to participate in such a great panel of experts on such an important conversation. I think there's a linkage, but also very different. The attacks that happen mostly in New York City, but also not to exclude New Jersey and other states, is there are coordinated attacks where a person issues a manifesto, buys illegally a rifle and goes into a synagogue to kill Jews, or coordinates it with a different group with an attempt to terrorize an entire country. But there's also sort of, it's linked but not as much, is the unprovoked attacks. Those attacks where a person who is identifiably Jewish walking on the street Friday night, going to synagogue and getting attacked, and that person is defenseless. He doesn't carry a gun. He doesn't even have whom to call because it's a Friday night. It's Saturday for him. So they are very different, but it's matched up to an alarming number of such incidents in recent years that you cannot just carry a simple slogan of saying we need to combat anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism as a whole is targeted towards one group of Jews or to one specific ethnic group. They're very targeted attacks that a person who hates Jews specifically, but also who sees an opportunity walking on the street, being able to commit a crime just because it's very simple to just pick up your fist and punch the person and see him helpless or her helpless on the street. So that is something that I see in the various communities, but especially in the Haredi communities in Brooklyn, where they feel sort of that, you know, they are not part of the larger conversation of combating anti-Semitism, if it's anti-Semitism on college campuses, if it's anti-Semitism as in terrorism, as in domestic terrorism, but just individual attacks where they can't help themselves but to sort of protect themselves by different measures that we can talk about.
Absolutely, and I think when we talk about the attacks in Muncie or in Jersey City or the attacks in Brooklyn, you know, these aren't white supremacist attacks, and we have to look at where are they coming from, why are they happening? And I want to transition here because I think it's so much easier to talk about the problem, the challenge, and all of your different stories reveal different sources of anti-Semitism. It's actually much more difficult to talk about what's actually working. Where do we need to go? What prescriptions do we have that is going to actually move the needle to combat each of these sources distinctively? And so, April, I want to turn back to you because I think fighting anti-Semitism in progressive spaces is really where we're going to be in the next 5-10 years. And your personal experience really does reflect a larger and growing problem. There's a lack of understanding about who Jews are, about anti-Semitism as it can relate to Israel. So what do you recommend for us? Where do we need to where do we need to go? What do we need to do in progressive spaces?
I think for anyone who defines themselves as a progressive, I'm going to quote my business partner with Jubian Princess, Kiyomi Kowalski, to say, and hi, Kiyomi, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. The second we leave, it's over. So get back in there. I know it's tough. I was a mess for months, but you've got to get back in there. You've got to encourage your kids to, what would happen if we all put our kippot back on and wore our Stars of David? I rock mine. I have a big hive from my mother-in-law, and it's everywhere. So what if they had to confront the fact that the person that they loved was a Jew? So we got to get back in there, get people to know us. 2, I hate to break this to you. Think 1922 Germany. It's 2022. We're not white. They're never going to think of us as white. So you've got to consider if, white supremacy doesn't think of us as white. We have to we're maybe white adjacent if you're Ashkenazi, but we also have to put Jews of color and marginalized Jews front and center in a lot of the work that you do, because they need to know that we are out here and that we are suffering along with the Jewish people. And I'm already marginalized. I've already been, I've already gone through whatever it is as a brown woman. So you have something for me on Judaism? Bring it, right? Like we've got you. But you also have to embrace the Jews of color, the marginalized Jews, and help us out and make us feel welcome and a part of the solution.
Thank you so much, April. Thank you. Jacob, I want to turn to you for solutions from your vantage point. to date, we haven't seen violence, consistent violence coming at all from the progressive community, but the Hasidic community is facing that consistent violence. And it's coupled with a challenge that we have right now in America. We do studies, Americans don't really know who Jews are, and they also distinguish between non-visible Jews and visible Jews, the Hasidic community, as different entities. So my question for you is, what can be done specifically to counter the anti-Semitism that's being directed toward the visibly Jewish community? And then second, how can we work better together within the Jewish community to fight anti-Semitism?
Well, the second question is part of the answer. I would say it's a combination of four. The first, the mayor and the governor spoke about it. It's enforcement. If it's adding additional policing, security measures, outside institutions, monitoring social media, that's all part of the enforcement. The second is prosecution. If you arrest an individual who's committed a crime, charge them with a hate crime and make sure that they're not let out on bail, or that they actually get, I mean, the statistics shows, according to the NYPD, that a large percent of those who are arrested never got charged with a hate crime. The third is education. We need to educate ourselves, obviously the various communities, but also the American public, if it's various faith and ethnic communities, about each other's traditions, about each other's practices. So we know there could be a Jew just wearing a yarmulke and still be considered an observant Jew. You don't need to wear a garb or a Magen David to be considered a Jew. But I think the second question, which is the fourth part, is bridge building. I mean, AJC has been doing great work between Black and Jewish communities, but it's also within the Jewish communities. I speak regularly to Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox leaders, and I ask them, why don't we see Orthodox leaders visit Reform synagogues and temples, and Reform leaders visit Orthodox shuls and yeshivas? Let's have a conversation together about this, how we address this issue, but also we can agree on so much of this. These four things that I spoke about, we can agree that you can be progressive but still want security measures for Jewish institutions. You can be progressive but still want a person of hate to be charged with crime. You can be on the far right or Republican but still want to learn about another community, about others. And I think together, if we know that we are all in this together, we are all facing from different points, but we're all facing the same level of hate from these groups, then we can work together. We can really build that bridge, that we can sort of combat that and actually see a brighter future for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. Now, Andrew, in the closing minutes, I want to turn back to you. What should we do in spaces where there aren't many Jews to tackle these challenges? We know from our studies that people who know Jews, they're more likely to know what anti-Semitism is, know that it's rising, know that we need to combat it. So what do we do in spaces where people don't know Jews, where there might be attitudinal or conspiratorial anti-Semitism? And then if you could take what you learned in the Midwest and what you're learning now in New York, are there shared recommendations from these two distinct types of anti-Semitism that you can offer us?
Thank you, Holly. And since he invoked the reform movement, I just have to say absolutely to Jacob that we need to build those bridges. And I so appreciate your leadership on that and saying that. I'm committed to doing it, and just that's our future. So the lessons from the Midwest, I think, are not a whole lot different than for the East. But what we learned in St. Louis and what we do in the Midwest is do the work that AJC has been doing all along. And that is, number one, creating connections between Jewish leadership and civic leadership. Trips to Israel, trips to Washington, trips to our federations and our communities. These build personal relationships with those in the halls of power, in legislatures, in the governor's office, Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter. Number two, building interfaith relationships so that religious Christians and Muslims can understand what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be a minority, understand that Jews are not different than them. We are all in the image of God. And number three, let us remember that as a Jewish community in North America and globally in the state of Israel, we are a strong people, a people with great strength that comes from our tradition, our courage, and our resources that we have. And let us lead from strength. And what that means for us at Hebrew Union College, and I think for all of us, and what a powerful speech that Natalie from Harvard just gave a minute ago. We need to lead knowing our values, knowing the strength, and having the courage to allow diverse opinions within our communities flourishing about the very things that we are challenged by, perhaps ourselves. When I began at the Federation 10 years ago, I remember the first arguments I had heard outside of the academy. I was a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. The first arguments I heard outside of the academy were why boycotts against Israel should be banned. Why? Because boycotts, they told me, were anathema to democracy. Well, that's a bad argument, and we should know better, and we should know better because boycotts, whether in Montgomery, Alabama, are key to democratic action. So we need to ask the more sophisticated argument, why is BDS anti-Semitic? And I believe it is, and we fought against it. And the work, again, I want to just praise David Harris and the AJC in leading this. We need to have broader shoulders, wider hallways for conversations, and not alienate our very people, our young people, that want those conversations. Again, I believe we can do it by leading from strength.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, April, and thank you, Jacob. Anti-Semitism is not going to completely go away, but we can push it to the fringes of the society where it belongs, where it's socially unacceptable. And I want to thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability even, your poignant reflections, and your powerful prescriptions of how we can go forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.